here. And we deal with the community on the backside when we try to look at those situations that maybe didn't go so well, and we study them and we analyze them, and we try to figure out what do we learn from that. A lot of my thoughts and comments there are really going to focus on that part of the discussion. You know, so my interaction, again, down in Miami as the sector commander there. Obviously a lot of sailing down there, Biscayne Bay, down in the Keys. I was the regional guy down there. Been involved in Chicago map race, patrol asses through there. I was down in the Whitbread start off in Miami when one of my good Coast Guard colleagues at a senior pay grade on a big ship at the start, who had this all planned out, called me 3 minutes into the race and said, yeah, it didn't go quite as planned. There's 10,000 boaters coming at you. Get these guys through the turn. They're trying to sort the Whitbread masts out from 9,990 other boats coming down here. We got through, and I had a first-class petty officer. I think smoked 6 packs of cigarettes in about an hour time frame, and he almost drove me crazy. And in our small boats, I was actually pulling people out of the water whose boats were capsized as they're trying to get out of the way. So I mean, been with you guys, and then out here, I got here summer 2012. Summer 2012 was in the wake of the tragic low-speed chase, full crew race to the Farallones. We had the Asian situation down here on the Newport to Ensenada race. Since I've been here, we had the Islands race where we lost one sailor out there in that unfortunate situation. So sort of been around your community, a little bit informed by your community. You know, been a rescue station controller, and I can tell you, when you make a career out of being in the Coast Guard, you know, you realize just how inherently dangerous the water is. And when we're talking to the offshore community today, and some of the inshore racers, I want to sort of connect that on maybe a personal perspective as a Coast Guardsman, and then really what I'm here to say, and maybe just signal through my presence, is we want to be part of the discussion. We want the sailing community to look to your local sector commanders, your regional district commanders, and figure out how we continue to raise the bar on safety writ large in the sailing community. I think that's a pretty noble aspiration for us. You know, I'll tell you a little joke here to sort of set the stage. So this gentleman's driving down, I think he's probably on the I-5, driving a white van down with a bunch of penguins in the back. And he has a little breakdown alongside the highway. Got to get these penguins to the San Diego Zoo, so he's sort of panicking. He's on the roadside for 20, 30 minutes, and then this gentleman stops in the big sedan. Says, hey, how can I help you out here, sir? He says, well, listen, I got these penguins. I got to get them to the San Diego Zoo. So the guy looks at his car, and he looks at his watch. He's a nice guy. He says, listen, I can help you out. I'll take those penguins. I'll take them down to the zoo. So he gets the penguins out of the back of the van. There's 7 or 8 penguins. They happen to all fit in the big sedan. He drives off. So the stranded motorist is on the side of the road here. He's hanging out. A couple hours later, one of those roadside assistance trucks comes, gets them all patched up, beaten feet down there to the San Diego Zoo to make sure the penguins got there. He gets to the zoo. No penguins. So he says, oh, what the heck's going on? Where's my penguins? He's supposed to be here at the zoo. He's supposed to be delivered today. So he sort of backtracks on the road that goes into the zoo, goes through a little town. What does he see? He sees this nice gentleman that stopped and helped on the side of the road, walking down the street with the 8 penguins waddling behind him. He says, hey, what happened to the penguins going to the zoo? The guy looks at him and goes, heck, we went to the zoo. We had such a good time. I took the penguins out for ice cream. Why do I tell that story? I tell that story because what I found is clarity of purpose, alignment of expectations is everything. You know? Who would think the penguins are going anything other than to the zoo, right? But hey, they already been there, done that, got the t-shirt. So I want to talk a little bit about the expectations working with my agency, with our agency. You've got some of my Coast Guard colleagues here today. You know, what does the public look at us to be? The public considers the Coast Guard to be the honest brokers. They expect us to insert ourselves in sort of all things wet. We are the Swiss Army knife for wet problems, is sort of what I look at the Coast Guard as. So when there's a regatta, or there's a big thing like America's Cup, or anything in between, the public has an expectation. You know, America's Cup was a multi-month, almost multi-year evolution in the Bay, and I don't want to steal Amy's thunder, but there was a lot of moving parts there. Deep draft vessels, commercial fishing vessels, recreational vessels, ferry boats. You got to work that pretty hard. A lot of different technology. The Stan has talked about different venues earlier today. You got to work through that. We are sort of the honest broker, the agency with a bias for action that can help you, that can partner through that. On the permitting side, come to us early. Create those dialogues. Get to know the sector commander folks. On the rescue side, which unfortunately we end up in, I'll use a case down here, the uncontrollable urge. You know, we get a call from that mariner, maybe 2.5 hours out, that he's had some problems with the rudder, lost his rudder. Think I got it, put him on a communication schedule. The next call came in, hey, I'm in trouble getting into the surf line off of San Clemente Island. We can't get there from here fast enough to be of assistance. Some days, the most local asset, maybe the San Diego helicopter in that case, might be off because there's one duty crew in the middle of the night. They might be out flying a case off of Mexico. And maybe the closest thing we can get down there, Captain Mahoney can launch, he can call his buddy up in Los Angeles, send a helicopter from there. We need to get in and be with you at your captain's meetings. And we probably need to give you a brief, and Stan talked about, hey, he went to the rescue briefing down under here, and it was well, he can help you during the daytime. We can help you around the clock. But we can't help you at the 11th minute of the 11th hour in the day. So I think there's benefit for the community to understand when you're operating an event in a certain venue, what is your Coast Guard local force laid on there? Who are the right folks? Just communicate with us. The low-speed chases, I sort of looked at that, studied that case study a little bit. That's a 178-mile race, 128-mile race, I think it is.
Low speed is just...
No, but what's that?
Islands race or...
Yeah, one of the races, the race out to the Fair Islands, you look at the miles, you look at the distances, you look at the geography of the bay, you look at VHF communications. Not an easy mix there. So there was some lost time, even from that rescue call, getting to the rescuers to potentially come out and be of assistance. So there's a lot of things here that we can dive into and learn. I can tell you, when you're in this business of working around the dangerous water, there's a lot of tough things you get asked to do. You know, on Wednesday I was in Los Angeles. We lost a Coast Guardsman here a year ago on December 2nd off of Santa Cruz Island out doing law enforcement patrols. He was a chief petty officer. And Wednesday, there was conviction of the two Mexican smugglers that ran him and his 3 shipmates down in a small boat down, killing his chief petty officer. So, you know, a little bit of sense of comfort there that they convicted these guys, and sentencing will happen in May, and the driver may get a life sentence, and the crew member might get a up to 60-month sentence. But I tell you what, that member's spouse was there. I spent a lot of time with her. And I went down there the day after it happened and met her 3 boys. She had 2 boys at the time. She was 7 months pregnant. And I'll tell you, when you have to deliver that kind of news, it gets really personal. And you know, we lost 11 sailors out here on these West Coast races last year. 1 in America's Cup, Andrew Bart Simpson, and that's a little bit different creature. I'm going to sort of steer clear of that a little bit, but the 5 off of the Fairlines race, and Asian 4, and the uncontrollable urge 1 here, you know, that's 11 too many. And from where I sit, the Coast Guard's got a role on that community. We've got a role with beach rescue. We got folks getting swept off the California beaches here by these sneaker waves. You'd think folks would learn from that. Up in Humboldt County, the northern part of my area last winter, you know, a lady, her husband, son, daughter, and daughter's boyfriend are out walking the dog on the beach. Dog ends up in the water. The wife goes in after the dog. Husband goes in after the wife. Son goes in after the wife, husband, and dog. Daughter watches her mom, dad, and brother die on the beach here. Dog comes out fine. And it's an education thing. It's a commitment to safety. It's a Coast Guard responsibility to partner with those communities. You know, when this thing first surfaced up, my folks said, sir, that's the National Park Service. Well, how many folks do you think that bring their dog to the beach, go through the ranger's office at the Park Service to go find out you're not supposed to have your dog on the beach? None of them. But we can reach into those communities. Our folks did some pretty creative things with a rescue swimmer and one of the public affairs specialists' dogs. And it says, who's the better swimmer? And they partnered with the SPCA, and we got it out through the local media markets and made some of the papers here. We got it out through some of the councils to the different communities out here, the Spanish community and other communities. And I tell you, we got to do the same thing with the sail community. I need to see my guys and my colleagues in the rest of the Coast Guard need to see our Coast Guard folks at your captain meetings, educating you about what the response assets are, where you're holding your races, making sure that we reiterate, if you're an event organizer, the safety of your race is on them. It's on you. You know, when my guys sign a permit, I'm now sanctioning your activity, so I'm a stakeholder in that. But I'm remiss if I'm not doing my job to hold my sector commanders responsible, to hold you responsible for your event. And again, that's not to sound like the heavy-handed regulator. We need to do that through partnership, not through onerous additional regulation. But the way the partnership comes, I think, is from us rubbing elbows and getting to know each other better. So I'm down here yesterday and today to sort of hear what's in the minds of your community. I think it's great that U.S. Sailing sanctioned this national forum, leadership forum. You know, when you go talk to a coastie spouse, you know, that's the toughest job you have. You talk to a recreational boater, and they say to you, or you talk to a sailor, and you talk to someone who lost their husband sailing. They said, well, John was an experienced sailor. How does this happen to him? And we can say, well, it was a navigational error. It was a freak wave. But you know, when you really dive into those cases, there's always more there. It was a navigational error that maybe put the boat in a place where the wave knocked it down and it was too shallow, and that's the technical stuff. But there is a long series of human decision points that influence those bad outcomes too. And we need to take a look and partner together and understand those. So I'm really, really excited. I mentioned it this morning, sort of spontaneously, but I'm excited that U.S. Sailing stepped up in some of these investigations here and really took a leadership role. I think that's great. I think collectively, how do we work together coming out of that here? Safety is a culture. You know, you don't just get safe automatically. I think, Stan, you talked this morning about more like the aviation model. I'm not sure if that was sort of the construct of the Keel study. If you have a mechanical failure, they dive into that. But I'd say the aviation model is pretty darn good because we work with NTSB all the time. You know, when the Costco Busan spilled 50,000 gallons up in the Bay Area in 2007, NTSB did an investigation, we did an investigation. Last January, a year ago January, the motor vessel Overseas Raymar hit the same bridge span that the Costco Busan did. It was also a tanker, happened to be empty at the time. No oil in the water. But NTSB came down and the Coast Guard joined and did an investigation. When that chief petty officer, whose spouse I was talking to Wednesday here coming out of the trial, you know, she's waiting for the Coast Guard to finish their investigation. I have an obligation to sit down and go through that with her line by line so she understands it. She wants to know, did the Coast Guard do everything possible to make sure they didn't put my spouse in a dangerous situation? I would say in the community, some of you here probably have a very personal relationship with some of those 11 sailors, and that's tough. But when you get really close to it, I would say it creates an obligation to see it through. How do you continue to raise that bar on safety? So I don't want this to sound like a lecture. It's really an impassioned plea to say, hey, how do we lash up and be good partners? Get to know my folks out here at the sectors. If you're from different parts of the country, get to know your folks in the waterways management divisions at the sectors. Invite the Coast Guardsmen down to your captain's meetings so they can be involved and brief your folks. I think you'll find at the end of the day, we're sort of a bunch of do-goodniks. We want positive things to come out of being on the water. I sat in a regulatory flavor panel yesterday, and there's some tough issues, you know, moving kids on the water and licensing and all that. And how do you tackle those? You tackle those through having a relationship with your partners where you can have those tough conversations. And you know what? Sean here locally can't solve those policy things, but he can pass things through me, and I can reach up to the program guys, and we can create a dialogue there. And at the end of the day, you change things through dialogue. Stan talked a little bit on the technical session earlier about, you know, some letters and some other things where you can influence some things to the right point. We're happy to partner there. I think that's more indicative of the organization than someone that wants to come into a recreational venue and really be the bad guys, the heavies. That's not the role, at least I'll speak for the 11th District, that's not the role we're carving out here in California. I think I can speak fairly clearly for my colleagues to say, let's be good partners, let's raise the bar on safety. Safety is a culture that takes your attention all the time. I send men and women out all the time to do dangerous work in the water. That's what they do for a living. You know what they do every time they leave the dock? Every time they get in an airplane? They do a risk assessment. They talk about their fitness. You know, maybe someone's got some issues at home. Maybe someone didn't sleep well last night. They talk about the readiness of the boat. They talk about the mission. Is it something we've done before? Is the area we're going a familiar area? Is it a new area? What's the environmental factor? They do that. And you know what? When they're on the mission, and because we're multi-mission, they went out to do one thing and we divert it for something else. They stop and they do another operational resource management assessment. Because these are professionals who go to the sea most days of the week, and they still take that time. We do team coordination training so that everybody that's on that crew recognizes if they see something wrong, they have an obligation to speak up, not just the captain. There's a lot of things that I think your community is doing in some cases, and in some cases it's not. So we'd be happy to sit down and have those discussions. Jim, I think I can start your
Yeah, I
hand.
just wanted to point out one thing. One of the things I've been encouraging our people to do for a while now is to try to get involved on the area maritime security committee. And I would encourage the Coast Guard for the same thing, because they get to know the players and they have contact with each other, and it makes it a lot easier for them to get almost anything done.
I think that's super. I think that's a good. You know, the area maritime security committee is sort of a security-centric thing, but there's also the harbor safety committees, which Jim's a little more maybe the right venue where you get the waterfront stakeholders there. That's sort of a separate, more navigation, water safety, permitting venue. But again, any engagement's good. The area maritime security folks is sort of the folks that have federally regulated land-based secure facilities for cargo and passengers and things like that. But your point is taken. Get connected with us through some of those venues. That's a great suggestion. So, you know, last thing I'll say is when you guys have a race, one of the things that race event sponsors have is what? An obligation to track 100% visibility on all your participants, right? How much is that going on? Realistically on these offshore races. You know, I think recent experiences tell us it's tough to do. And I'm not throwing that back at you, but maybe that's a place where we can have some discussion where we can get better at it together. Maybe we can give you some suggestions. Maybe I need to look at my guys and have some discussions about certain types of races where we need to commit a little more organic Coast Guard capability. I'm not sure, but I've learned some things being down here with you. And I think with that, I'm going to stop, turn it over to Amy, and then save some time for John here. So we'll take some questions collectively from the panel at the end. Again, I hope I'm not coming across as a finger in the chest. That's not my intent. My intent is to come across as a partner. So Amy?
Thank you, Admiral. Good afternoon, everyone. As the Admiral said, my name is Lieutenant Commander Amy Wirts. I'm the Chief of Waterways Management at Sector San Francisco. And so what falls under my purview is the navigation safety of everything that moves on the San Francisco Bay, as well as the rest of our AOR along the coast, but focused very much on San Francisco Bay. So under that, I oversee our traffic management, vessel traffic service, all the movement of our large commercial vessels, the aids to navigation, and of course the permitting of marine events on the bay as well. So what I'd like to do is to kind of go off the Admiral's themes that he set out and give you a couple of local examples of how in San Francisco, the sector, the waterway shop, partners with the sailing community and with our event organizers to try and achieve that goal of the open communications and of enhancing safety for everyone. And both of these examples also involve John Craig to one degree or another. So the first one that the Admiral already alluded to was the tragic loss of the low-speed chase during the full crew Farallon's race in 2012. I came to Sector San Francisco about 3 months after that actual incident took place, and it was very interesting to me to see, even in that short time frame, all of the positive change that had taken place in our communications with the offshore racing community and with the racing and sailing community in San Francisco Bay in general. So I'd like to give a little perspective on what our relationship was and how our oversight worked over those types of races before the Fulton Farallon's incident and how that changed afterwards and the improvements we've seen since. So we had a great relationship with the sailing community and with the Yacht Racing Association and the Offshore Yacht Racing Association of San Francisco Bay for oversight over offshore races. We had full visibility. They were all permitted by the Coast Guard. We permit those races because what they create is an extra or unusual hazard on the waterway, right? So in a sense, really what the Coast Guard is permitting is the disruption that the race creates on the water, even more so than the actual race itself. But in doing that, we do become then a partner with this sanctioned event that we've now said that you're allowed to hold. So although we had a really good relationship in the permitting process and a good relationship with the YRA and the different sailing organizations, we were attending skippers meetings, talking about offshore safety, talking about the importance of life jackets and all of those sorts of things, there was no set standard for how races were administered. There was no set standard for the types of safety equipment that crews should have on board or for the information. There was no set enforced standard about the crew lists when the boats would all show up in the morning and grab different sailors because someone didn't show up or someone wasn't fit to sail today. There was no definitive list that we had, that the race organizers had, that the race staff could say definitely who was on every boat. Some of that was a little bit loose, and a little bit loose works until it doesn't, right? And so the unfortunate events that happened during that full crew Farallons race, in the immediate aftermath, as all of you I'm sure are aware, Captain Stowe, who was the sector commander at the time, working with the local racing community, decided collectively to put a temporary halt on offshore racing. And in that time, the Coast Guard, we took some time and looked over our practices, the way that we interact with the race organizers, and made some suggested improvements for race management, which immediately went into effect, and then collectively decided to start and open up racing again with some additional safety measures in place that were done on a very informal level. During that time, we also worked with U.S. Sailing to put up together the panel that Sally headed, and Chuck was also on, as well as John, to take a look at the overall causal factors and make more safety recommendations for moving forward. And then the third thing that happened then, which was really just a wonderful example of the sailing community coming together, recognizing a problem and solving it internally, was the creation of a group called the Northern California Offshore Racing Council. And the NorCal Org was a group of local sailors. No one said, the Coast Guard was not regulatory to come in and say, you have to do this. We worked with that group to help them to get formed, to help them to identify some of the issues, but it was a largely, fully independent group of people that got together and decided on a set of minimum safety standards that every race should require and should enforce. And one of the things that was identified in the initial review was doing those checks after the end of the race and disqualifying boats that are not in compliance, which was working very well. That was one of the recommendations that the NorCal Org also put into their list of required offshore safety gear or practices for race management decks. So that list of, what that list of the required safety equipment did for me, when I'm looking at an offshore permit, and I'm not an offshore sailor, I'm not a racer, I have some sailing experience in cruising, but I don't go out around the Farallons or down to the islands, is to give me a benchmark, that this is what the people who do this all the time, who have years and years of experience, think it's important to have. And it was coming from inside the community to say, this is what we need to have. And then that same list was taken by Chuck up to U.S. Sailing and is now nationwide. And it's not necessarily that if you don't on any of those have one of those individual things that you're not going to get your permit or we're not going to let you hold your offshore race. It's that I know that you've considered that. And if you're not complying with one of those recommendations from the NorCal Org, then in the permit application there's been an explanation of why it's not reasonable for this race to need those things. So that we know that the thought process has been gone through. And that's been a very productive partnership. The other really good thing that we saw was the use of the jibe set, which is now being used by all of the offshore races in the San Francisco Bay area, which gives us real-time information about the crews that are on board, all of their characteristics. We had the gentleman who created that program that came to us and met with our search and rescue experts so that we can actually see some additional information to have those specifics about survivability rates and for the individuals that may be in the water. So that whole experience with the very unfortunate loss of life, and I'll agree with the Admiral, it was my first time in my career of having to sit in a room with the families of people who were lost when Sally and her team came and we talked through the U.S. Sailing report with them. It's not something I look forward to doing again in my career. It's very difficult. But the way that the Coast Guard was able to work with the sailing community and the way that the local sailing community in Northern California really stepped forward, and I recognize this as an issue that only could be solved from within, was a very productive and made good out of a very tragic situation. So that's the first example. And then the second example, which is a very big thing, right, was the extraordinary event called America's Cup that we held on the San Francisco Bay over the course of the last 2 summers, right, culminating in the finals, AC34 finals at the end of this year, or I'm sorry, in the summer. You know, I say extraordinary because for most of the marine events that we have interaction with, the Coast Guard's nexus is in that, only ensuring that your event is not creating a safety hazard for everyone else. And in that nexus, then looking at making sure that your event is being held in a safe manner and that the organizers have safety foremost. With an event like the America's Cup, it was a much bigger undertaking because we had the onus on the Coast Guard to ensure an equitable use of the waterway by all of the normal waterway users, to make sure that all of our major commercial traffic could still move in and out of the bay, to make sure that other smaller marine events or normal-sized marine events could still be held, that the sailing events that happen every year and swimming events that happen all the time can still go on, and that the ferry routes aren't disrupted, and that we can also put on this amazing event that was proposed to be held in that natural amphitheater of San Francisco Bay. So we had this partnership that we built with America's Cup Race Management and with America's Cup Event Authority, but also the partnerships that we had with our other federal agencies like the National Park Service, who we had to work with on the environmental reviews, and all of the state, California state agencies, local agencies, working heavily with our Harbor Safety Committee, so that those partnerships extended beyond just that relationship between the Coast Guard and the event authority or the organizer in this case. So, but having that pre-existing relationship, John had been the race director at St. Francis Yacht Club for 12 years, was very well known to the Coast Guard, and that was a great entry point for those discussions that we had, to have someone who was already so well versed in working with the Coast Guard. So, because of all of those other pieces in the traffic management, the Coast Guard's role was bigger, and we had to create the special local regulation and all of these additional rules to manage traffic around America's Cup, all while John was trying to set up a race course for boats that weren't built yet, and with specifications that no one knew how fast they were going to go, and all of those things. And Stan was, doing all this amazing technology stuff that Stan does. And so that partnership became key. Because as the boats evolved, and oh my goodness, they can foil when we didn't think the boats were going to be able to foil, and they can go at least 10 knots faster than we thought the boats were going to be able to go, and all of that kept changing. That relationship that we had between the event authority and race management and the Coast Guard allowed us to be flexible. It allowed us to be very open with each other and to have those discussions that we needed to have to be able to make that event happen successfully. And making that event happen successfully was both the race happening and all of the spectators being out there to watch it safely, but it was also not delaying ferry schedules, keeping the commuters moving and the sightseers moving around San Francisco Bay. Over 50 days of racing between 2012 and 2013, and not a single deep draft vessel was delayed. So that was a really big undertaking, and couldn't have been done, like I said, without the partnership. And then the last thing I'll say in that round before I turn it over to John is that, again, in the face of the tragedy with Andrew Simpson and that loss of life, that baseline of partnership that we had allowed the America's Cup to continue. Right, because we knew that the steps that were being taken by race management and the event authority to conduct the safety review, to make the safety recommendations, to make changes that were necessary to ensure the safety of both the participants and the spectators around the bay were being made in good faith. And if we hadn't had the close working relationship before that incident that we had, I don't know that we would have been able to get through that and through that point when that tragedy occurred. So that is my Oh, and then one thing. So Stan, this morning, because he's really good, I've done skippers meetings with Stan where I was really fortunate because he went right before me, and it's like he just puts this big softball up in the air about the importance of safety and of, taking responsibility within the community in terms of the masthead antennas and all of that, and it's very good, is the partnership piece that he talked about this morning with the leveraging technology and the AIS beacons and putting out the AIS markers around the course, is that has been a very mutually beneficial undertaking, is that we had this huge event that took place on the bay, and the Coast Guard also, because of that working relationship we had, reaped lasting benefits out of that. We were able to get some new NAIS transmitters moved up because the America's Cup was coming and because of the work that Stan was doing, and proof of concept that what was being done in this marine event could be a useful tool for the Coast Guard and other applications. So that's to say that we can all help each other. And the Coast Guard, I always like to think that one of our biggest strengths is that even though we're federal, we're local. Because most people don't think of us in interactions as the federal government, even though we have those authorities, and we are. Sometimes it takes a long time to get policy things done because we are a federal organization, but that we're local. And so wherever you are in the country, I echo what Admiral Schultz said, that we are just people who want to do good and are very happy to partner with your organizations to ensure the safety. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks. I'm going to reiterate what they've said, but I'll just put the other perspective on it as a data organizer or a user of the U.S. Coast Guard system. What I mean by that is it's sad to say that if you look back at the low-speed chase incident and you look at the positive changes that Amy spoke about and how great those changes are, but we had to have that tragedy occur to actually get us to move forward on that. And then I look at when Oracle's 2 Octobers ago flipped their AC-72 in San Francisco Bay. And they flipped it, but it was destroyed. Nobody had actually figured out how to write one of those. And so there was theories, but the reality was that the equipment that they had out there to write that boat and bring it back in one piece wasn't sufficient for the job that they needed to do. So it ended up, after numerous attempts, underneath the bridge and folded up and broke it. And we brought that boat back at 1 o'clock in the morning back to Pier 80 upside down. It was a pretty somber scene. Out of that came a bunch of recommendations that was passed to all the teams. So Oracle opened up their books, their safety books, and said, you know what? These things aren't safe. We got incredibly lucky that we didn't hurt somebody. And so these are things that we're doing to make sure we're safe, and we would suggest to you other teams that you do the same. And those were training and spare air bottles and helmets and a whole list of things that were recommended. And those came to America's Cup Race Management, and we sent a regatta notice out saying, hey, we need to look at this. This is what we've learned. And everybody's pretty happy with that, and all the teams complied and seemed to be working okay. Then, on a practice day, Artemis ends up breaking up, and Bart gets trapped underneath. And Bart loses his life, and the sailing world lost a great sailor and a great friend. But after that incident, Coast Guard came and said, do you need some help? And we're like, no, we think we're going to try and take this on. And so as a result, all the teams got together and put all their cards on the table as to what safety gear they had, what safety gear they didn't, how could we up the game. And there was an incredible cooperation amongst the teams who at this point are drawing lines in the sand to go, let's go make these boats safer. And from that spawned some panels and eventually a bunch of recommendations that a lot of people ended up reading about in the paper. And those recommendations came from the teams, the majority of them. And through the teams telling us what they wanted, we were then able to go to the Coast Guard and go, here are the recommendations that we, ACEA, who's actually the organizing authority that pulls the permit, and when we want to add these to this permit. And as a result, we were able to get the majority of that through, and most of that was with the teams. Now, there were a few structural things that were thrown in there that everybody knows about that maybe didn't fly. But at the end of the day, the majority of what we were trying to do was achieved. And I guess from that, the one thing I have to say is it's sad that we have to have those incidents that create us to think about safety. And it's just human nature. I mean, but what I would love to see is us try and create a situation where we have more of a culture of safety, where we don't have to have that accident to be talking about what's good about what we're doing and what's bad. I mean, one of the issues in the low-speed chase as far as race management was radio communications out to the fair lawns is very, very difficult. And we've all known that for years and years and years, and yet after that incident we were able to say, no, there's a way we can fix this. And sure enough, we fixed it. And it would have been nice if we'd done that before. And so that's one of the reasons that I think the partnership with the Coast Guard is so important, because it allows us to tell the story. Here's our problem. This is where we're working. And they and us together can come up with solutions. The other piece is that I think a lot of it is that, as they've indicated, they look at us as the experts for what we do. And they're not trying to legislate, which is what a lot of people interpret when they see these reports and they see Captain Stone shutting down the port, and they take that as being legislative. And it's really not, because what they are doing is trying to work with us to get it done. And so those partnerships are so important for the safety of the events we run, but also the ability to get other stuff done. For the America's Cup, perhaps one of the best parts was we had a 3-mile long windward-leeward leg. And then we had about 100 yards one side of it, 100 yards the other side of it. And that was the box that we got to play with it. And as far as it was our responsibility to make sure that the spectators didn't come into that box. Well, that takes a lot of little boats running up and down that area to try and keep the spectators, some are maybe just trying to get from one side of the course to the other, or from one bar into the city, or whatever the case may be. And the Coast Guard was able to help us with other on-water agencies to help create a situation where we had the fire department, we had the San Francisco Police Department, and we had multiple other on-the-water agencies that were able to assist us in keeping that boundary. And to take it even a step further, by letting in this case it was the fire department, when we were running the Red Bull Youth qualifier series, which we were qualifying the kids, and the kids were training in the South Bay prior to them having their event, meant that our assets were incredibly stretched for on-the-water medical service, because we were actually running the LB series, and we also had all these 10 AC-45s blasting around the South Bay. And through introductions that Matt made and some of the other Coast Guards, we were able to get the fire department to provide us with their medical boat the entire time for the Red Bull train period in front. And it's really amazing. You just have to ask, and typically the answer is, yeah, we can figure that out. And so I just really wanted everybody to, try and think about the safety culture, and if there's something that's in your area that's not working and you know it's a problem, you could please look at it before it becomes a real problem. And then also try and get with these people as much as you can in your area. Because what they enable you to do is more than you're going to be able to do by yourself, and also it's going to be a lot safer. And with that, I'm going to open it up.
So if we're not careful, I'm a former chief of legislative affairs. If we're not careful, we look a lot like the Congress. We only step in and do things when there's a crisis, right? And I don't think any of us want that reputation. Yes, sir.
I've got two questions. First one is, how do we and when do we need to involve the Coast Guard in local events? And the second question really is kind of what are you doing about aids to navigation? We keep hearing about those coming down. So the first one is, when do we need, for local events? Do we call you every time we have a local event?
It depends on the thresholds in your local area, right? And the overall policy for the Coast Guard is we permit events on the water that create an extra or unusual hazard. And that can be defined as the extra or unusual hazard, right? Yes, that's my world, right? What defines that is it can be an extra or unusual hazard to the waterway, to the participants in the event. And the best answer I can give you is the when is 135 days before the event occurs by regulation. That's not to say that if you're inside that timeline, you're going to get a definitive no, because I know in San Francisco, we work with people who maybe were unaware of the timelines. And the best thing you can do is just go and talk to your local waterways shop that knows that's at the local sector, that's the shop that's responsible for permitting, to get an idea of what types of events they permit in that area. In San Francisco Bay, we define an extra or unusual hazard as anything that disrupts or crosses the shipping lanes. That's one of our thresholds. It's very hard to hold an event inside San Francisco Bay that doesn't cross the shipping lanes. So we do a lot of permitting because we have a lot, unless it's happening in Berkeley Circle and only up in that area, or in Richardson's Bay, which is a recreational area. But it really depends on the layout of your individual, of where it is that you're holding, where you're from, your harbor, your bay looks like. And the only people that can answer that is the Coast Guard locally where you are.
And ATM? Aids to navigation.
Oh, okay, yeah, the Atlas, I can take that one.
So the aids to navigation one's pretty simple. We've just hired Stan, and all aids to navigation. I should have had this conversation before. That's a good question. It's a very fair question. I'm gonna get a little long-winded here, but I'll give you a little framework. The Coast Guard, as a federal agency, finds ourselves under increasingly challenging fiscal situation. We are taking active duty Coast Guardmen out of our ranks every budget cycle since about 2010. To the tune of multi-hundred coasties going home each year at a time when America really wants more services from its Coast Guard. So given that reality, we're also trying to recapitalize 40 and 50-year-old large capital assets, long-range aircraft, ships, our patrol boats, our helicopters are coming due for recapitalization in the next decade. We've got some real fiscal pressures. So the ATON is one of our 11 statutory mission sets. So we are looking into aids to navigation. I started out in 1983 as a Fresh Academy grad on a buoy tender out of North Carolina. And the buoys back then were big stacks of batteries dropped into the pocket, and when we're done, we chuck the batteries in the water. I mean, we evolved. We don't do that anymore. We've actually gone back and recovered all those batteries. We've learned some lessons. But aids to navigation has evolved from the solar panels to that. But you know what? The placement of aids to navigation hasn't really kept pace with technology. How many folks in this room do not have a GPS in their car? Okay, so it's 3 of maybe 60 people. That's evolved in the last few years. On the waterfront now, you have a captain program or some program like that, fairly low cost, similar capabilities, show you where you're at. We've got aids to navigation, the Bay Area for a good example, the backwater Delta region. We got aids up there in Schultz Slough that maybe 3 duck hunters go to every year, and it's a federally maintained aid to navigation. Is that a good expenditure of taxpayer resources? I don't know. I think that's the stuff we're looking at. We have sort of internally said, what's the right decision point in aids to navigation? There's been some discussions about maybe a 10 to 15% reduction of aids to navigation. We're looking at that. Right now, in the 11th district, I've had my folks out there. I think we proposed the decommissioning of, we think we've actually decommissioned 33. We got 8 more we're looking at. Every one of those removals of a buoy in certain locations has a public dialogue exchange period. We advertise that, we welcome public feedback. Based on the public feedback, we look at it and we say, you know what? This buoy, as we thought, isn't really serving the purpose that's all that critical that the federal government should maintain the cost and responsibility of maintaining. If it's a floating buoy, we can take it out the next time the buoy tenders in that region. If it's a fixed aid, it costs us money to take it down. We may not go after that aid until that aid was due for rebuilding, new boards, new lights and stuff. So the short answer is yes, we are looking at the AIDS navigation program and sort of pulling it forward because it hasn't gone forward outside of the hardware on the buoys in terms of where you place them, in terms of an environment with a lot of new technology out there. But are you going to see critical AIDS navigation? This is where the discussion probably gets a little bit focused now. You know, what you think is a critical aid and what the Coast Guard thinks is critical aid. That's where we need to have some public exchange of information. So there's the public comment period. If you have concerns about a specific aid, I encourage you to engage on that. And there is some discretion at the sector commander level and at the district commander's level about removing those aids. But the short answer is we're forced to look at everything we're doing. We need to get more efficient. We need to find cost savings. Or at the end of the day, the only valve we can open is sending more people home from the Coast Guard, which means even less public service for you as a taxpayer. So we think it's a necessary, reasonable approach that we're taking. But again, there's going to be some definite discussions about specific buoys where there's going to be some emotional attachment in some cases. There's going to be a legitimate navigation attachment to it that we may underestimate the importance of, and hopefully through dialogue we'll figure out, yeah, you know what, we didn't quite get that one right, we proposed it, let's leave that. Or you know what, let me give you one quick analogy and I'll stop. Loran. 2010, we're going to close down Loran State. The Maine fishermen, anybody from Maine here? The Maine fishermen swore we were going to put them all out of business. Because since the inception of Loran, they would go out and look at the TD lines and they would drop their lobster pot at the cross of 33-1400 and 22-962. And that lobster pot was going nowhere else and all their charts were annotated. But you know what? We looked at what it cost us to maintain Loran. We looked at the GPS, DGPS. We said, you know what? That is just not a good expenditure taxpayer. We took the aids away, and I bet your lobstermen have probably cut their trips down in half because it's a heck of a lot easier to look at the GPS lat line and drive it than to sit there with their Loran interpolator. But again, the maritime community, there's always going to be some resistance to change. I think the aids on discussion, right now we're sort of at a pause. We just sort of said we need to do a better exchange with the public about the whole maritime transportation system. That's waterways management, that's aids, that's the cargo, the ports. So we need to have a better dialogue with you. But I suspect we will revisit and have a continued dialogue and be taking a few aids out of the system. So I hope that's responsive to your question. Sir?
On the theme of fiscal constraints, I'm just curious, when a multi-year event like the America's Cup comes to San Francisco Bay, is that something that you have to devote significant assets to, which I know you did, under an existing budget, or do you get compensated by the event authority for all of the resources that you put to work?
The event authority picks up the costs for all those things that the event authority should own. And then the Coast Guard absorbs some costs because we had more Coast Guard presence on the water than we would have over that 18-month period, specifically in that location to pay to support that. But that's sort of under the banner of sort of co-use of the waterway and public good here. So yes, we expended some money that we did not get a separate appropriation for, that we essentially took out of the Coast Guard budget to support that. But not specifically support the cup, but specifically to support the cup occurring while other waterway uses went on unimpeded. Anything to add to that?
No.
John, I'm not sure the high level you're not speaking for ACA, are you?
No.
Or you want to? You know, we feel like there's a lot of events. You know, there's certain things we get called into where you can say, well, what are you doing as a private entity? And stuff like that goes on all around the country. You know, we try to find that coexistence points where, you know, the public good is served by that event, and hence there's additional Coast Guard responsibility goes with that, hence we feel Coast Guard. Now what we try to do, and you heard John talk a little bit, we try not to cover all that with organic Coast Guard capability that has a price tag to it. Try to bring in as many Coast Guard auxiliaries who are volunteer, who can sit there and help patrol an area. Now, they have no law enforcement authority, but you can put them between two Coast Guard law enforcement assets, or maybe a Coast Guard law enforcement asset and Oakland Marine Police Unit. So one of my prime themes since I've been on as district commander is, you know, leveraging our partners. You know, we shouldn't be doing things that there's a redundant capability that a local agency has. let's get out of that business. Let's sort of optimize, not have redundancy. So we tried to drive those Coast Guard costs down to the lowest level through strong partnerships, use of auxiliaries, and then we did lean on the ACA to really carry the lion's share of that load. They did a good job. Very professional organization work. Okay?
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Others? Anyone?
I think the examination that the Coast Guard did and U.S. Sailing did on the West Coast incidents was really awesome in the information it brings to sailors everywhere. Is there any move to take a look at some of the non-organized things? I'm thinking like on the East Coast, some of the rallies that turn awry and people have to be rescued. Is there any move to sort of look deeper into some of those incidents and come up with reports?
Well, we got Monica. I mean, writ large, you want to take the whole marine casualty investigation thing, maybe answer it under that lens? Or Monica Rochester's our Chief of Prevention Operations. She's the prevention marine safety expert here in San Diego. I think that may be a good question if you don't mind taking that sort of.
Thank you, Admiral. Under the prevention role that we work, includes waterways management and the marine event specifically that we're talking here. And you're talking about accidents, injuries, equipment failures, things of that nature. The Coast Guard does have a role and authority and jurisdiction to do that. And for instance, the sailing vessel Aegean, the vessel was crewed by U.S. sailors and happened in international waters. By our requirements and our policies, that falls to the local Coast Guard unit that would have jurisdiction and authority over that. Excuse me, I'm suffering from a cold here. Recreational vessels comes under a little different jurisdiction. It can be also a co-jurisdiction depending on the elements associated with the accident. But for the most part, that jurisdiction is held by the local county. So an incident per se, such as the uncontrollable urge, was actually overseen by the LA County Sheriff's Office because it was in their jurisdiction. There are other different parameters, but on the recreational level, the majority of that jurisdiction falls to the local authorities, not non-Coast Guard authorities.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, did NTSB come in on the American stuff? They did, okay. Other questions for John, Andy, and myself? Yes, sir.
We run regattas out around Catalina, around Sunday. What do you think the risk is of interaction with the drug running partners?
Good question. You know, I mentioned that event we lost at Coast Guard December 2nd, a year ago. You know, I honestly thought when I came here that the real catalyzing event that was going to generate public attention on that issue wasn't going to be the Coast Guardsmen being murdered. I thought it was going to be probably a mom and pop or recreational boater run down by an unlit panga going across the water 40 knots at night. I really thought that was probably the highest threat there, so I guess I got that wrong. I guess at the end of the day, I would tell you, as recreational boaters, they're out there, and they're probably transiting these waters multiple times a week, and we need to be aware. You know, I think at the end of the day, the good news story for you is through our efforts, in 2012, we stymied about 60 tons. We interdicted 60 tons. That's 120,000 pounds of pot coming across the southwest border by maritime means between Coast Guard, our DHS partners. Last year, we drove that number down about 40,000 pounds, and I think it's not that more got through. I think we've actually had some effect. We've actually pushed some of it to the land border, though, because we work very closely with our Border Patrol partners. So the good news story is we have influenced their behavior. They're running bigger pangas, multi-engines, and we pushed them hundreds of miles offshore. You know, there's still a couple cases up at Vandenberg Air Force Base. There's a landing here the other day. So I won't say there's no risk here, but I would say that risk has probably been driven down because we've been tackling this problem pretty aggressively. And through the forced behavior, you know, they've gone up as far as Chuck, your neck of the woods. They've landed up in Santa Cruz. We've had intelligence indicate they've gone as far as the Bay Area. It's a very adaptive adversary who was very motivated. It's the Sinaloan cartel, the most powerful cartel on the face of the planet now, is behind that smuggling puppet. 40 to 60% of their criminal activities are funded by the money that comes from that pot thing. So I'm not going to give you the drug speech, but I'll give you a little bit of that just to educate you. At the end of the day, Washington State, Colorado, we got legalized marijuana use. We got here in my state in California, you have medicinal use. But I got to tell you, I'm worried about the fact that those folks are moving across a border that's porous. Could be drugs right now, and that's illegal, hence we're out there to stop it. It could be special interest aliens with the intention to do damage to this country. It could be components for weapon mass destruction. So we're tackling that problem very hard. In terms of being on the water, sort of coexisting on the water with them, I guess we're trying to regulate them too, by getting them off the water and pushing, at least push them further west so you can have your operation. But it's a legitimate threat. You need to be aware of it. You need to have your lookout. You know, you're in the water, the full regs require to have a lookout on board at all times. You know, go back to the aging case. That might have been one of those things where, and you had a lookout that night. It's a tough area to navigate down around this tornado and stuff, but the human eye, it's still very, very essential towards being safe on the water. So I hope that's a good answer. Others? We have about 3 or 4 minutes, I think. Any other questions?
One more. As you retire, agency navigation, will they be available to organizations to pick up responsibility? We have a particular issue with
Talk about Lighthouse for a second.
there are lighted land assets. One is Bird Rock, Catalina, that has a permanent light on it. And another one is White's Land, and it has a
Yeah, I can't speak to the specifics. Like in general, you know, from lighthouses on down, you know, there are private aid navigation. There's rules that govern what can be a private aid navigation. There's things that really should be federally maintained, and there's stuff. There's probably willingness to have discussion of those. You know, lighthouses, we've transferred lighthouses to the Park Service. We've transferred lighthouses to some private entities. You know, one of the challenges there is folks get enamored with a lighthouse and they realize how difficult and expensive it is to take them. We've legislatively directed some retired Coast Guard ships, decommissioned Coast Guard ships, to agencies for museums. You know, most of those fail because it's very hard to maintain. We don't get rid of ships after 60 years because we still do more mileage out. They're about done. We're done. Final question? Dave, John, would you like to make any closing thoughts? This is sort of your venue here a little bit.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you, Amy. Again, the big word here is partnership, and hopefully you can get to your local waterways offices, start bugging them, introduce yourself, and as I say, it's definitely been a great relationship that we've had in San Francisco. Unless anybody has everything else, thanks for coming. And
one quick thing, Amy's going to introduce her. Amy from San Francisco. We actually have the luxury of having the Los Angeles, her counterpart from LA, and her counterpart from San Diego. You want to make a couple introductions?
Sure. Yeah, my counterpart from San Diego, the Chief of the Waterways Management Shop, is Lieutenant Commander John Bannon. He's our local. And if there's anyone here from Los Angeles, Lieutenant Commander Radia Jones. For getting information about these types of things. And believe me, waterway shops are used to getting a lot of phone calls about a lot of different things. So we enjoy it.
So thanks for your time. If you have any questions, we'll be up here for a little bit. And again, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks for having us here.